Good morning, colleagues. You need to be with me because I've got new glasses. I can basically see you, but I might struggle with some of the writing. So I'll not tell you to go to the shop that I went to. But anyway, so first of all, are there any apologies? Councillor Flynn.
An apology from Councillor McHugh. She's unwell this morning.
Well, let's hope that both Councillor Flynn and Councillor McHugh get back to full health as quickly as possible. Just before I go to the formal agenda, I need to mention a few words about Maureen Tate, who sadly has passed away and who was on this committee for quite some time and did a lot of good work. Maureen was the Church of Scotland representative on the committee, and she was appointed in March 2017. Before that, she had worked for many years in education and will be familiar to many from her work as a teacher and latterly as a quality improvement officer in education services prior to her retirement. So I would like to send the condolences of the committee to her family and friends, and I'm going to ask the director to speak, and then if somebody else wants to say a few words, they can do that.
Thanks, Convener. Just to extend also my thoughts and best wishes to Maureen's family. As the Convener has said, Maureen worked in Sealock House for a number of years as a quality improvement officer, and before that had a long and very, very successful career in education. I've only known her for a comparatively short period of time, but her work to support the work of this committee and indeed the service in the preparation and consultation of reports was very much valued. Maureen had a very sensible approach, brought great wisdom to the process, and I would just like to extend my condolences to her family and all who knew her.
Thanks for that.
Convener, thank you. I've already had some discussions with officers about sending a letter of condolence to her family and recognition for the time that she was as an employee, and indeed the time she spent on this committee, and how valuable her contribution was. So I think it's good to be able to recognise that, particularly under the circumstances.
Thanks for that. Anyone else?
Just to say, it was a big shock for ourselves as religious reps to hear about Maureen, and we worked closely with Maureen even before this committee, so we just echo all that's been said already. Thank you.
No one else? If there's no one else, we will move to, we've had the apologies, declarations of interest. None. Minute of the meeting of 6th of November. Anything on that? Okay. The rolling action law, pages 10 to 13.
Convener, can I just ask a question in relation to the first item, 377? What's the timescales for the report coming back from the government?
Gary might have a further update. All I know is that this has been promised. I haven't heard specifically when it will be published, but Gary attends the ADES Resources Committee that have been looking at this, so he might have some more up-to-date information.
Okay. Just in answer to Councillor Nimble's question, to understand this, at this moment in time we don't know. We've been advised as of last Friday at ADES the government are still working on it. They're going to include probably an overview of the DSM system in Scotland in it. That in itself may have delayed the publication of it, but rest assured once the government publish the findings, as we agreed, our report on it will come to the Education Exec and show the report in full with a number of notes and suggestions for ways forward.
Okay. Anything else on the rolling action law? If not, then we'll move to item 5, implementing of the Council's medium-term financial plan. Mr. Naylor.
Convener, can I maybe just come in before we start on this? There's obviously 4 items on the agenda, 5, 6, 7 and 8. 3 of which are merely forgotten. There's no decision to be taken on 3 of these reports. Does it not make more sense that these reports are in the information bulletin instead of clogging up the agenda? The only thing we have for an approval is the short break service statement. The rest is for noting. I just think that's shocking.
Well, I do think that the executive is here to take decisions, and I think that maybe we've asked before to look at things, but it'd be a very poor agenda, of course, if there wasn't these items today. But as we go forward, and I'm sure everyone would agree, we've got the Council of Future meetings, etc., it should be reports coming for consideration, preferably. And reports for noting, there should be another way to do that. Give everybody as much information as they can, but we can spend a long time here with reports, as I say, are just for noting. But if we go back to the item on the agenda, Mr Naylor.
Can I just highlight that some of these reports that are here today, the executive asked them to come back to committee?
Fair point, yeah. Mr Naylor.
Thanks, Peter. At the committee in November, on the 6th of November, we were asked to conduct a consultation exercise relating to targeted school savings. This sat within the context of the Council's medium-term financial plan, and we were asked to arrange for and thereafter have a consultation led by schools, whereby schools would consult with their parent bodies and their staff as to how the savings targets might possibly be reached, and for us to report back to the committee. So the report details, first of all, the context of the medium-term financial plan, and then describes, paragraph 4.1, the various aspects of the consultation exercise that were undertaken. There were a number of meetings held, both between schools' head teachers and individual parent councils, and also the service met with all the parent council chairs in November. Sorry, we met on 2 occasions in November, on the 13th and the 30th. The parent councils raised a number of concerns about the exercise. They are noted at paragraph 4.2. Significant concern about reductions in staff numbers and the potential consequential impacts that would have on the quality and level of service provision in the school sector. Paragraph 4.3, parent councils also asked officers a number of questions about various other service savings options that could be considered, and in broad measure those service savings options are under consideration in other fora, not least the executive and the full council, in terms of the wider budget savings exercise relating to children's services. We received a number of written responses. Some of those were multiple submissions of the same correspondence, but they're listed at 4.4, where there was responses from individuals, some from parent councils and also some from some elected representatives. And 4.5 sets out some of the broad concerns that were indicated within that consultation process. The exercise required that both the primary and secondary sectors would submit responses that we would then collate and present back to the committee. And during the course of that process, both the primary and the secondary head teachers worked collaboratively and collectively and took the view that they would like to submit submissions on behalf of the whole primary sector and the whole secondary sector, rather than submit a pick and mix school by school response to how savings would be achieved. So that's what we received back, and what we're asking the committee to do today is to note what has come back, and for thereafter that to be fed into the Council's wider budget consideration as it moves towards the February budget. The conclusion of the report indicates that this was a very challenging exercise, and that to take savings from schools under any circumstances necessarily will have some impact, and the exercise was very much focused on trying to both get towards the target that we were seeking, but also to do that in such a way that any impacts would be minimised. Part of our discussions with parent councils are that in the context of the 5-year plan, we would like to work with them in a more collaborative, collective way to develop options, both with primary head teachers but also to involve parents in that process, so that as we develop our 5-year plan within the medium-term financial planning process, that we are working collaboratively as far as we can with all the stakeholders and with all the head teachers. And to that end, the next Parent Council Chairs meeting has been arranged for Thursday of this week. In terms of the responses, if I could refer you to Appendix 1. The response back, first of all, at the top of the schedule from primary sector, collective agreement across the primary sector that one of the options would be to remove the teacher allocation to early years provision at this stage, because of, in part, the expansion of early years and the increased qualifications of those working in the early years sector and new emerging management structures within the early years rollout. The second one is an allocation for discretionary support beyond the minimum allocation for running classes in each school. This is an additional allocation that's made from Children's Services on an annual basis to allow additional class configurations following debate and discussion with the service. The third one would be looking at a range of different budget heading options, whereby we wouldn't be taking any or all of these budget lines away, but perhaps looking at the possibility of taking 10% from one, 20% from another, and so on and so forth. In terms of the secondary sector, it's broken down into 3 parts essentially. One is, and this again came from the secondary head teacher feedback, was that in terms of trying to maintain as much provision as they possibly could and have minimal impact, there's a fairly simple operation that can be done, which is to make use of the CMIS system for online registration, which would mean that we could register pupils without having a 10-minute slot at the start of each and every school day. So in effect, there can be a saving of 16.7 full-time equivalent teachers without any impact whatsoever on learning and teaching. So the number of teaching periods that pupils would receive would be the same as is. Also from the secondary heads was, ordinarily, as we move from year to year, we build in a factor of growth where there is growth for demographics. The secondary school roll across the piece is rising, and we had budgeted for a growth of 10 FTE, and the secondary head said, well, as those staff are not yet recruited or deployed, then that could be, if you like, foregone to help with the savings exercise, and that could be coped with. The next one, the 34.5, would simply be a balancing figure of full-time equivalent staff reductions, and the secondary heads have indicated that in that context there would begin to be really quite significant impacts on the curriculum offer, and indeed potentially on class sizes. So that's what's coming back from the schools. What officers are asking the committee to do is note what's come back, and for the options that are presented in the appendix to be the subject of further consideration by all political groups as we move towards the budget setting exercise.
Thanks for that. Councillor Nico, John, you will be standing in for Councillor McHugh.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I hope I can do Councillor McHugh justice this morning, as this is a wee bit unplanned. The implementation of the Council's medium-term financial plan in schools is only one part of the financial strategy of the overall Council. The paper is an update paper following the decision of the last Education Executive asking head teachers to bring forward their proposals and how the budget gap for education could be met for members' consideration, and consultation to be had with parents and parent councils. The details and the options within the paper provides members with the feedback that was given to the director by both the primary and secondary head teachers, with the broader suggestions for the engagement with parents and parent councils being contained within the other service area proposals, and they're available to members to look at in more detail. I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate my previous commitment to maintaining the national pupil-teacher ratio and no compulsory redundancies. Therefore, any proposals that would reduce the national pupil-teacher would reduce beyond the national pupil-teacher ratio, gosh, that's easy for some people to say, will not be given any further consideration by the administration. Following discussions with the director on behalf of the administration, I can state we will not give consideration to point 3 within the secondary sector, as this would indeed impact on pupil-teacher ratio significantly. All the other proposals, none of which will impact on national PTR, nor will incur compulsory redundancies, nor indeed would have an impact on the learning and teaching, will be given consideration within the wider context of the budget as we move forward. It's recognised that this will result in children's services not achieving the full level of savings that's been asked. The balance of that will require to be found from elsewhere across the council, and that's what we're currently working to do. Thank you, Convener. And I move the recommendations.
Thanks for that, Seconder.
Happy to second and reserve that right to come back.
Comments or questions, Councillor Miller?
Convener, can I just ask Mr Moody to state what the decision was at the last Education Committee meeting in respect to this?
Thank you, Convener. The decision is included in the minutes, which are part of the papers that are before us, and they're on page 6 of your agenda. And broadly, the committee agreed to the principle of requiring schools to identify targeted savings, that the Director of Children's Services have the head teachers consult locally with parents, staff and pupils on savings options, and then that he brings a report back to this committee, and that's the report that you have before you today.
Well, that's not strictly true, Colin. What we've got here is information for the primary sector and the secondary sector. I was expecting a breakdown for school from the head teachers, each individual head teacher. We don't have that.
Well, Convener, we've heard the decision, we've heard the Director's report. If there's question of whether there's a mismatch between the two, I'm sure Mr Naylor has a comment to make on that.
Yep, I think Mr Naylor is the best person to do that. Mr Naylor?
Well, the exercise was as set out in the report of the 6th of November, which was to agree the principle of requiring schools to identify targeted savings, and that I was to direct head teachers to consult locally with parents, and that we brought back a report on the development of schools' budget savings options. In my earlier comments, what I said was that both the secondary head teachers and the primary head teachers, in discussion both amongst them, between themselves and with ourselves, took the view that they would wish to bring back to this committee their collective views on the things that they could all accept and go forward with. So rather than one school saying I would do X, Y and Z and another school saying I would do A, B and C, which frankly I think would have been almost impossible for us to take a view on because of the disparity that there may have been, I think the process adopted by the head teachers to reach collective agreement on certain key areas provides us with an opportunity to take a view about things that could reasonably be taken forward on a whole council basis.
Convener, again, bearing in mind this report's really for no time, I don't see any problem in individual head teachers being able to feed into this and tell us exactly where they are in respect of their budget savings options.
Well, it's not been done, and we can register your comments on that. Would you like to speak next?
If you don't mind, actually just to give a bit of clarity from a school perspective on actually what this is going to look like for us. I'm speaking specifically from a secondary point of view, obviously being here as a secondary rep. The first point with regard to the provision of school registration process, with regard to a 32 period week, if we remove registration, and whilst from a budget point of view I fully understand why that might be maybe the most appropriate in terms of learning and teaching, what it will do is remove that first line guidance. So in terms of sort of GovVec provision, in terms of getting it right for every child, we obviously will remove that in terms of that single contact for every secondary child as a point of contact every single day. It would also mean in terms of that the general bits of information that happen during registration, like absence notes, things like checking on attendance, obviously at that time that's when that's done. If that is removed, obviously it's then taken up teaching and learning time. So actually, whilst it does seem on paper is actually quite a reasonable saving, there would obviously be concern about what that would look like for the impact on teaching and learning throughout the school day. CMIS we do currently use. For anybody that is familiar with CMIS, there is a tendency for it to go down, which means obviously we're then into paper registration. That then impacts on obviously office staff and then sending things down. In the school I'm in, we're currently sitting at about 1,300. That's a lot of paper, and it's a lot of keeping track of what pupils are doing on a period by period basis. In terms of obviously the pastoral side of it, obviously at that time, not just from a first line situation but also from that wider perspective, pastoral staff often will actually meet with pupils at that particular point because that is the time of the day when it perhaps is not then also impacting on their teaching and learning, because obviously they have a teaching commitment as well. So I'm not saying that there are no positives with a 32 period week, but there needs to be an understanding of actually the impact that that's going to have on the wider situation for all pupils. Assemblies are traditionally done at this time. If we're having an assembly, similarly it will affect class contact time, and therefore obviously what pupils are going to miss when they're at an assembly when perhaps we would have done that during registration time. Sorry, on to the second point. I've just got a few things just in terms of a clarity from our point of view. In terms of demographic, I'll start that again, that's my growth provision. My school, at the moment, we are expecting an additional 40 pupils. In real terms, that means over 2 FTE. If we don't have that in addition to the cuts, whilst I would say that yes, head teachers have approved the 10 FTE and suggested that actually they could work within that, they can't if we also take away the demographic growth provision, because that obviously then adds into that number. There's also added into that the issue with regard to probationers. Now, we have gained, in my own school, and not the only one, we've gained 3.7 FTE this year. So if you take the cuts, the probationers, and also the demographic growth provision into that equation, you're actually talking more than we currently have here in Appendix 1. As a timetabler, I am currently in the situation of looking at course choice, and yes, you've already heard that it will impact on our timetables. It will impact on what we can offer, particularly at senior phase. We have pupils already undertaking courses we're expecting to provide continuity for, we're expecting to provide progression. Obviously, part of the decisions that we are currently making in a really difficult environment, because I actually at the moment, my first course choice evening is on Thursday. I do not know at the moment the staff that I will have in order to deliver those courses. I do not know, therefore, what my timetable is going to look like. And apart from obviously the uncertainty that I think, obviously me amongst others is facing, and this is going on in other schools. I mean, I'm speaking very much from my own situation, but this has actually been replicated in every single secondary school. And I'm only going to speak about secondaries because obviously that's my experience. But I do have a concern about what that will look like, because although we have got information down here in terms of reductions, I think the transparency of it is actually, and the reality of it is much wider than actually we have in the graph that we have in front of you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Coons?
Councillor McDonald.
Just you're sharing the mic, I didn't know what she was.
Teamwork is possible.
That's great.
I think it's very important to hear what he said. I know there's a comment made about some disappointment that the reports here are for noting, but from my point of view, actually coming to committee and having the opportunity to discuss this information and to hear the relevance of this information and the input round the table is really important, that we actually are able to do that and then take that back and have our discussion. So I welcome these reports coming here today and having that opportunity. Also, that it was said that what was agreed on the 6th of November, and that consultation process going back to head teachers to then consult with parents, which I think we've all had experience of that happening in every individual school. But that I think it's really important not to misrepresent what we have here today, which is that collective view. Individual head teachers did go and consult with their parent body, and individual head teachers decided that this was the way that they wished to input most appropriately to this process, and in consulting them and allowing them to take the lead on that, that's very important, because that is in essence what we asked at committee, that head teachers be given that time and that opportunity to come back. So I think again I welcome that we've been able to come back to committee and understand what head teachers themselves wanted to present to us and have considered. As the leader of the council said, it's very important that we've already restated our commitment to the National Curriculum Teacher Ratio and no compulsory redundancies, and that these are for noting. There will be a lot to be considered over the coming period, and what's going into the budget. And without this discussion here today and the information, and that would be much poorer for the information to try to make those decisions. I think that it's important that we take those points on board about the registration, but I think as well it's also that many of us have perhaps some time since we were ourselves at secondary school, or our children, and that it's important to know how things work differently in different schools, and that registration does not work the same across all of the schools in our clusters, and that we can look at examples of best practice in some areas and learn from those, and appreciate that this is the discussions that we're having around the table will cause concern amongst teachers, but these are decisions which have to be made, and we need to be given the full information. So I think that from that point of view, it's about us as members understanding as well that, yes, I know, for example, my daughter's own school, that registration never takes place at the beginning of the day, and that they have a very different, or certainly for her time, to have a very different way of doing things. And that, yes, issues about pastoral care, which as a parent as well, looking at those issues when discussed actually do have solutions which can be put forward. So I think it's also about sharing that best practice amongst our schools and come up with solutions, because we do have difficult decisions to make. We have these budgetary decisions to make, but there are ways where we are doing excellent things in areas in our schools that we can adapt, and we have to make the right decisions overall across the board. So I'm interested to hear what others have to say, including our other reps, but I think it's a good report and gives us that information to go forward, and was what was asked for, so I welcome it.
Thanks for that. Before Councillor Coombs comes in, I'll take Ms. Brochek, because I like resonances. I remember that.
Hi, I just wanted to make a bit of a statement on behalf of parents, and these are my thoughts, but also the thoughts that I've noted from other parents at many meetings that I've attended. So as a mum to two boys at primary school, the past couple of months have been a roller coaster of emotions for myself and other parents and carers. Since the last Education Executive, many parents have attended at least 4 different meetings over the festive period in connection with the medium-term financial plan, whether that be with their individual head teachers, parent councils, with elected representatives, or with Mr Naylor and his colleagues. It's demonstrated a willingness on the part of parents to engage in the consultation process. However, what many parents have struggled with is the severity of the proposed cuts and the manner in which parents were informed. Letters were sent home out of the blue, and the manner in which the letters were written felt cold and very businesslike. It did nothing to get parents on side and engaged in the process. The pitch and tone of the letter, in which some letters mentioned the risk of compulsory redundancies and the requirement to identify significant cost savings, scared and angered many parents and carers. We'll all be aware of the Edmund family and the concerns that they had about the level of additional support provision for their son as it got discussed at First Minister's questions, an issue that has been highlighted nationally with regard to current service provision before any proposed savings are implemented. This reallocation of service had a profound impact on this family, and this is what needs to be considered in moving forward with proposals, especially when you see the proposal for consideration in the primary school is to review SFLAs and school support. The letters ask parents to identify savings to their school on a substantial scale, which many struggled with given the feeling that schools are already stretched and working to full capacity with limited resources. Parents were given no support or guidance in relation to navigating these complex educational systems and processes. An example would be the Macron Agreement, a phrase that many parents had never even heard of at the beginning of this journey, yet it's an example of crucial terminology and language that parents need to know if we are to be true partners in the consultation process rather than a tokenistic gesture. Parents are willing to explore different ways of working within our schools to reduce costs, but we are not willing, nor do we want the quality of education, nor the diversity of opportunity to our children to be diminished in any way. Whilst the management of this process began rather appallingly, what it has demonstrated is a genuine willingness on the part of many parents and carers to engage in this process positively and to be valued partners. There are many specific skill set amongst parents, such as procurement, business and finance, which could be utilised. So just to conclude, due to the way that things happened this year, Falkirk Council caused great angst amongst parents and carers that was completely unnecessary, and Falkirk Council needs to reflect on this. We have a fantastic resource with the Falkirk Area Parent Forum, but this relies on the goodwill of parents, the chairperson in particular, and if this is to be the main forum of communication moving forward, then it's crucial that more support and resources is given to this if required.
Thanks. Councillor Rico John, I'm going to give time later on, but she might want to respond to that, no doubt, when you're winding up. Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to start off sounding like a broken record. On the 6th of November, when this was first mooted, I did say then that we were asking teachers if they wanted a broken arm or a broken leg, and nothing's changed since then, and the heart attack is still coming down the road for the next 5 years. Fiona took away some of the questions I was going to ask, but I will direct them to Robert. As a general, are our school rules increasing or decreasing? I know Fiona said that there was going to be extra pupils, but I think it was just your school in particular you mentioned.
I'll let Robert actually just clarify across the board. My understanding is that it's consistent across the authority, but Robert will actually obviously have the clearer figures on that.
Secondary roles are rising and have been for the last 2 to 3 years, and will plateau about 2022-23. Primary roles have stabilised and begun to fall. So what had been, if you like, a bulge going through primary has begun to hit secondary and will work its way through. The secondary roles are rising.
Okay, because I know Larbert High obviously is within my area, and I know they're talking about an increase of around 400 for next year. So over this, so secondary are rising and primary is dropping. by the same amount? So overall, have we got more pupils next year or less than we have this year?
We don't know. We have roll projections, but at the moment we are going through the primary registration process, whereby people are required during the course of February to register all those who will become P1 pupils. We then have a placing request exercise, and what we do is we, over the course of the coming months, we modify our roles in line with our projections, and we get closer and closer to actuals.
We must have a vague idea.
We do indeed have a vague idea, and our role projections tend to be pretty accurate, which is why I can say to you that there will be, and that's why we had planned for this, there will be more pupils in the secondary sector next year than there are this year. It's not an exact science, despite increased relationships and information sharing with health, and despite the fact that we have almost 97-98% uptake in our early years centres, there are children that we don't know if they've been born or not until they're 5 in the register for school. So that's one of the reasons that it takes, we can't give you absolute clarity in that, but the general message is that the secondary schools are rising, roles are rising, and the primary are beginning to fall.
So more pupils at secondary schools. Will we have more teachers in secondary schools to deal with these extra pupils?
That depends on the decisions that the council takes.
But given that these proposals don't amount to the amount of savings that your service has been asked to find, if any of these proposals are taken out, you're going to be even shorter on achieving the savings target. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Could I just say, I want to be very lax today, because this is a very important subject, as it always is in education, but normally people that come along would know that I would be very tight on standing orders. And whilst I want to be lax, I didn't want to be overly lax. So if you could make the next, say, 2 points, if you've got 2 points to make, then we need to consider moving to somebody else.
The support for learning and the ASN provision. Can you foresee any way that that will be increasing, given that the resources there have been cut dramatically and the need is growing for those in greatest need?
I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say that the ASN has been cut dramatically. I don't know when that was. The ASN resource that we have, and indeed
I don't mean in Carn Grange, I mean within schools to support them.
Within schools, the last cut to that would have had any potential impact on ASN was an SFLA reduction 2 years ago. There weren't any reductions to SFLAs last year. And we've actually increased ASN provision via this committee in terms of expanding autism units both in the primary and secondary sector over the course of this year. So resources that are going into ASN actually have been growing.
Just hear a lot about pupils that can't get the support that they're needing. Okay, that's fine, thank you very much for that. One final question. What do you actually class? I see that the nursery teaching provision has been taken away. What do you class as a nursery teacher?
We don't have nursery teachers. We have never had nursery teachers. We have teachers that are deployed to support in nurseries. So we allocate a resource to schools, which is additional teaching capacity, with the intention that is deployed in the nursery. Now, depending on the size of the school, that could be a 0.2 FTE or a 0.4 FTE, and it varies across the schools that have nursery classes. But in a school where we allocate 0.2, that's the equivalent of 1 day a week a teacher being in the nursery class. And as we grow and change the provision of early years and the staffing arrangements in early years, and the qualifications of early years officers is expanding improving, and we have different levels of early years, given the relatively small allocation of teachers to nursery classes, the collective view of primary heads was, given the scale of the challenge that's faced, this is an option that could be considered.
I'm just going to wind up now.
No, I'm sorry, that would be just stretching it a wee bit far. I'm sorry about that. But I think one thing I would like to say is what we have before us, to a certain extent, is a budget exercise. Because if we were to say we're only going to keep to the parent-teacher ratio, that would affect the budget going forward. And so to that extent, but it's good to hear that. It's very important that we hear that from the administration. And as leader of the opposition, I welcome that. What I'm also going to be saying as leader of the opposition is that we will be saying no job losses across the school estate.
Not just compulsory.
No job losses across the school estate. That will be our position going forward. And that may depend on our support for the budget. Because we also say we're not looking for job losses across the card. So if the administration can come and say to us, look, we agree with you, there will be no job losses in the school estate. Not today, I didn't expect that to happen today. If the administration come back to us and say there will be no job losses in the school estate, then we would certainly be more amenable to working with them. Councillor Nimmo, you came in earlier, but it was a question, so I'm going to let you
Just quickly, and it's based on what I said earlier, Convener. If you look at 4.1 on page 16, head teachers locally engage with parent councils, parents and staff about the budget challenges faced and the potential savings options that could be considered. All I was asking earlier was for a list of these options. We don't know what these schools were actually consulting on.
Well, I'm sure that Mr Naylor will provide that information. Is that okay, Mr Naylor?
Well, the head teacher, exactly as it says, and the potential savings options that could be considered. So the head teachers discussed with their schools what options could be considered. Now, to the best of my knowledge, what the secondary head teachers discussed was cuts to teachers.
Where does it say that in the report?
Just we're not going to have a debate between the two of you. We will ask, you will write to the head teachers as the opposition and ask them if they're prepared to give us the actual detail that their school brought forward. And that's fair, but it's a very valid answer from Mr Naylor. Anybody that hasn't spoken, Mr Alexander?
Yes, Convener, thanks very much. I think that the contribution around the table this morning has been useful, and it's a contribution we wouldn't have had had the report been included in an information bulletin at full council when the issue was going to be debated anyway. So I'm pleased that that's been recognised. Also, what's been recognised, and I appreciate the point, I'm not going to mention anything to do with letters. I've said what I could say at the last committee meeting, but what I would say is that we wanted this consultation process to begin as early as possible. You know, there's dangers in that. And the danger is that you highlight for a 3-month period issues that are not going to do the administration any favours. Put it that way. And that's the price that's worth paying if we're going to have the teachers, the head teachers, and the parents involved in the process. Now, there's a learning curve for us all with regards to consultations, and I can assure you that learning curve will be recognised for next year. But we've heard today that the issues that went before the service. We've heard, for example, that, and I don't see how we can get it broken down per school, because if you actually look at most of the savings, they're coming through the collaborative approach that's required. The collaborative approach that I think, well, at least I thought we'll ask for in relation to the comments in previous debates at this particular committee. So, you know, having delivered what I think the committee was looking for, I'm surprised to hear the criticism we've had this morning. But you know, that's life. You take the burden of administration, you take the fact that goes with it. And it's important that we learn from it. I would like to say that I've attended a number of parent meetings, and I've been hugely impressed with the attitude of parents. They've recognised that they have a situation whereby it's out of their control in terms of external funding, very much out of our control, although influences has been brought to bear, mostly through our leader of the council, in terms of discussions, negotiations and whatever with ministers. And hopefully we still hope that we can get some concessions and some benefits for the authority. But what we have at the moment is what we have, and until that resource issue is addressed at the national level, then we have to operate within the guidelines that are there. We have set criteria that I think is reasonable, and that is with regards to no compulsory redundancies, and also hitting the target that's set for us in terms of retention of teachers. I don't see how we can prevent job losses, because that means that we're not going to accept retirals. For example, the profession will continue to evolve as teachers retire and other teachers come in. That's something that was described by Macron as refreshing the profession. I didn't particularly like that phrase at the time, I don't like it now, but it's true that new teachers do bring new ideas and blood. So we accept that particular argument. But in terms of the overall process, yes, there's a lot can be learned from it, but there's a lot has been learned from it. And I think that the teachers, the head teachers, when they did get together, came up with some proposals which were very much more acceptable than the proposals that hit the headlines with the previous exercise. So with that, I'm happy we're now seeing this. We give a commitment that in all areas of the council's activities we will continue to try to find ways in which the parents, teachers, service users can be involved. I won't talk about any individual cases, but I think there's a danger in looking at individual cases and assuming that these are budgetary issues. Often they're not. The resource management issues, they're issues. We've heard from the director this morning that the support within the schools is actually increasing. Has been increasing. The last couple was 2 years ago. That's something to be welcome, and as I say, not all decisions taken by head teachers or school managers or at a local level are budgetary concerns. But all in all, I'm satisfied with the report. I'm glad it came here rather than go to full council as part of the information bulletin, because it, as I say, would have robbed us of the contributions that we made this morning.
Thanks for that. Just before Reverend Rollo comes in, can I just clarify the job losses thing? Obviously, as somebody that keeps saying that's had teachers in their family, anybody that gets to a situation in teaching, and regretfully a very stressful job, if they want to go, they can go. I'll just clarify it. Job losses is one thing, but the numbers will stay the same. And thanks for allowing me that clarification. The people employed in education at the minute will be the number that will need to go forward, because you're reading the reports, so there will be no lack of job, there will be no reduction in posts in education as far as we're concerned. Any way you look at it, we're not buying compulsory redundancies or job losses.
Well, welcome back, Katrina.
Reverend Rollo.
Just call me Michael, that's fine. But when I saw this to begin with, I was not overjoyed when I saw the scale of cuts that had to be made. So it came as a huge surprise, and so it seems to me as if the director of Children's Services was tasked with the duty of coming up with how this could be, this shortfall could be met, and that the process was devolved to the schools, for the schools themselves to come up with it, and that was brought to this committee. And although we can learn from the process, and I think it's been very helpful this morning to hear what the teacher reps have been saying and what the parent reps have been saying, but I feel sorry for our director, because it's almost like he's getting it in the neck, but he's only been doing what he's been asked to do. And some of the things that we ask him to do is just adding to the burden of what he's already got to do, and I actually wonder what it's going to end up with doing, other than just causing more work. So I think he's actually been done what he was asked to do, and I just feel that it's a bit sorry for our director that the process has ended it in the way it's ended, and yet we still haven't been able to come up with all the cuts that are necessary. And I just wanted to voice that.
Fine, thanks. For the first time ever since 1980, can I say I support your position regarding the treatment and position that the director found himself in. However, Councillor Meiklejohn, is there anybody else that's no spoke? Councillor Meiklejohn, you want to wind up?
Thank you, Convener. Firstly, I'd like to welcome your as Leader of the Opposition, your commitment to bringing forward an alternative budget, and look forward to being able to see where there may well be some consensuses and going forward, and indeed where the differences may be. My colleague, Councillor Alexander, has already dealt with the issue around the consultation with parents very well, and I think well, it hasn't happened in the way that I would have liked, and didn't have all the controls over the communications, because that's devolved down, and there is lessons to be learned from that. But we responded to calls from parents previously to be more involved in the process at an earlier stage, and that's what we tried to do. Unfortunately, the messages that we were having to give out weren't what people wanted to hear. It wasn't what we wanted to deliver, with the level of budget gap that the council has. But that is just a fact. And irrespective of that, it is still a fact that we still have to identify £20 million for this year, and indeed look at future years. The proposals we have at this moment in time are only proposals, and it's a suite of proposals. It's a pick and mix, or it could be rejected. But that's something that has to be taken into context with the bigger picture of the whole council and the whole council round. We've already made a commitment to prioritise education, and they already had been given a lesser target, and indeed I've clearly indicated that they are not going to meet that target, and that is something that as a council we will have to look to identify elsewhere. We know that. But at the moment we're still in distillation process. We have all the information here available to us, and I think it's been very positive that the teachers have worked collaboratively, because I believe that is the way that we'll look to minimise the impact on any one individual school. By doing that, and as a result, I would hope that there will be a very minimal impact, certainly on schools. What we can't forget is that we are in a fourth phase of transformation. All services are transforming, and education services have to look at how they continue to deliver education in the future, and that is not necessarily about efficiencies and budget cuts. It's about modernising our service and the way we deliver education. I appreciate that is probably something that's quite challenging across the board. But we have to work collaboratively to be able to do that, because it's the outcomes for our children that we have to focus on, and that's what we want to do in looking to modernise our education services. Spent many hours over the last month or so speaking with parents, speaking with head teachers, and every time you do that, there's a further richness, and what we have seen is a much more collegiate relationship developing. And I think as we go forward into that transformational agenda within our services, it will bring great benefits, but I think it will bring great benefits that we don't necessarily have identified yet but the richness that Mrs Prochek spoke around the skills of our parents and what they can add to the council in going forward. We are still in the deliberation process. The Scottish Government's process has not concluded, and there's still some hope and anticipation that there will be either some additional funding or indeed some flexibility within what we have that will be able to benefit Falkirk Council as a whole, but would allow us to revisit some of the areas within education and look at areas that we may look to invest in as part of our transformation programme. But we also have to do that in a collective way, and that's certainly the message that I have sent out through the Director to the staff and indeed the many parents that I've spoken to. On that, Convener, I'll conclude and move the report.
Thanks for that. So the committee agrees to the recommendation which are in open. Okay. Next one is Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional.
That's Convener. This report is again for noting paragraph 3.1 in terms of background sets out what the committee on the 4th of September agreed that this report would include. At 3.1 it says that it would include feedback from Education Scotland on the Phase 2 plan. It would also detail the allocation of support to be received from Education Scotland, the level of support that we would receive in financial terms from the Scottish Government, and the arrangements for evaluating progress regarding Head Teachers Charter, parental and community engagement and pupil participation. The report doesn't cover the second bullet point and the fourth bullet point in paragraph 3.1 as promised at the the 4th of September meeting, because as things stand I'm not able to report on the support to be received from Education Scotland as they are still in the process of a reorganisation and a staffing recruitment exercise, nor the arrangements for the Head Teachers Charter, parental and community engagement and pupil participation, because as Gary mentioned earlier we understand that these documents are still in preparation. What the report does however include is an update on the feedback we got from Education Scotland on our plan, some actions that we have taken as a result of that feedback, but the report also provides feedback from Education Scotland inspection of all 32 local authorities, whereby it reached an evaluation of readiness for empowerment across the Scottish system. If I could move to paragraph 3.4, I met with officers from Education Scotland and indeed one of the other collaborative leads, the lead from the West Partnership, and we went through a process called peer evaluation, where we examined their plan and they examined our plan in partnership with Education Scotland, and identified things that would be action points as we move forward with the plan. The two high-level messages we got from that process was it was suggested to us by Education Scotland that we might want to look at and reaffirm and refocus and strengthen our governance arrangements for the collaborative work, and also that we might want to be a little bit more outward-looking in terms of our communication of what the collaborative was doing and its achievements to date. To that end, I met with the 4 chief executives and the 4 council leaders at the end of November with a view to considering how governance could be strengthened, and it was agreed within that forum that that grouping of the 4 chief executives and either the 4 council leaders or the 4 portfolio holders for education would form what would be referred to as a strategic board, and the aim and purpose of that strategic board would be to hold myself in my capacity as lead officer for the collaborative to account in terms of the progress that was being made and indeed on the work plan that had been developed. And it would be an opportunity for the senior leaders of each of the 4 councils to be assured that we were both making progress, but also that if there were any areas of work that they felt that we were not targeting, or they would wish us to target that were not currently in our plans, that they could be added. I don't want to say too much more about that other than to say that Appendix 1 to the report details what that arrangement will be. It's a grouping that will meet twice per year. We've agreed March and September, and I will attend that with update reports to that grouping. The reason that we've picked March and September is, certainly in Falkirk terms, that would then give me an opportunity to bring a report that has been considered by that group to the Education Executive, because our dates coincide. The other bit was the detailing what it is that we have done and what we've achieved and the progress that we're making. So again, there's an appendix to this report, Appendix 2, which has outlined achievements to date, and that sets out what's been done since we published our Phase 2 plan in September. And I would add to that that we now have a Forth Valley and West Lothian Improvement Collaborative website, which will be launched on the in-service day on the 12th of February, when we have for the first time participants from all 4 councils taking part in the same staff development activity in this particular occasion in the arena of early years. The Scottish Government notified us in late October, early November, that we would receive funding dated from the 1st of April 2018 to be spent by the 31st of July 2019. They've allocated us just short of £900,000 to support the work of the collaborative, and we are in the process currently of recruiting a number of staff to be drawn from all 4 local authorities into a variety of posts to assist the work of the collaborative. These staff will be seconded from their substantive posts across the 4 council areas. We've been interviewing throughout January, and we're hoping that these individuals will be in post to work alongside centrally based officers, head teachers and others to take forward key elements of the plan. The bit that we are still waiting for, as I mentioned earlier, is that in the fullness of time, those seconded staff will work hand in glove with Education Scotland officers, as I understand that Education Scotland officers will in future be deployed on the basis of regional teams. The final bit in the report, and again it's attached as an appendix, is the report by Education Scotland on readiness for empowerment. In broad terms, what Education Scotland were tasked to do was to engage with head teachers, with local government officers in all 32 local authorities, to look at some documentation, but principally to discuss with all of these various different stakeholder groups the extent to which head teachers felt that they had freedom and empowerment around the arena of school improvement, curriculum and the setting of curriculum, staffing and funding. And I would say at the highest level, the report commented very favourably on the extent to which teachers from across Scotland feel empowered in the arenas of improvement and curriculum. I think it also indicated that there was a developing picture whereby there was much greater confidence that schools had more and more autonomy in terms of staffing and indeed staffing structures. And the final bit was a developing picture which links back to the question about the DSM review, a developing picture in terms of the autonomy around funding. And I think our earlier report touches on the autonomy and the empowerment of head teachers with regard to budgetary matters. So these 3 documents are attached as appendices to the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. I think we are now starting to see the fruits of the collaborative coming together. I think the benefits of being able to share across the council area, the learning from each other, will bring a great richness to each of the councils, but particularly my concern is about Falkirk Council, and the richness that will bring in supporting our teachers and going forward to be able to be the best that they can be in delivering teaching and learning, and allow our children to be the best that they can be in whatever they wish to be in the future, and we can support them in doing that. Can I just say before it comes up, and I'm happy to speak and make the comment on behalf of the Deputy First Minister on this, that there is no intention to take any decision making away from local authorities around education. He said that on a number of occasions, and I just want to put that on record here today. The decision making role will remain with the local authority, as will the budgetary considerations. What this is about enabling us to increase the attainment of our children and giving them the best quality of education and supporting our staff in going forward. I'm pleased that there's a bit more structure around the collaborative, and I think as a result of having a designated person from Education Scotland, that will give us a link and a clear thread through the process that will allow access to information and resources as we go forward. I'm happy to move the report, Convener.
Thanks for that, and I'm happy that I can speak on behalf of the Deputy First Minister and give us an assurance that in the future years we won't lose education completely. So thanks to him for that, as I say, and to yourself. Seconder?
Right, I'll second it.
Right, okay. You want to come back in later, I take it?
Maybe.
Right, okay.
Maybe.
But you want that?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Councillor Nimmo?
Thanks, Convener. Let's be clear, decision making can change in the future. That might be the case just now, that it's not going to get taken away from local authorities. But again, this is part of the SNP's centralisation agenda. Regionalisation is just a one-stop, if you like, to centralisation. You can call it modernisation if you like, but you just need to look up the definition. Centralisation is quite clear. I'm just curious, how many staff are going to be involved in this, Robert, when it's fully operational? What we anticipate?
Your mic, son?
Councillor Patrick, could you
Put your mic on.
From the monies that we've received from the Scottish Government, we will be seconding somewhere between 8 and 10 staff. That will be drawn from our number that will be dedicated to collaborative working. And my understanding is that once fully operational, it's likely that Education Scotland on a regional basis will have a team somewhere around 6 full-time equivalents. So we're possibly talking of a resource of maybe 14, 15 people moving forward. The grant we've received, I anticipate will be refreshed, but as things stand, it's for 1 year, and will be part of the Scottish Government budget settlement. But my understanding is that the intention is for there to be, in our context of these 4 councils, a team of approximately that size.
So the current budget is roughly 900,000 for the coming year. That takes us up to the 31st of July. Has there been a guarantee of further funding after that for future years, or is this going to just form part of Falkirk Council's budget allocation from the government in the future?
I haven't received anything in writing about future years, but I have had discussions with civil servants. It would be their anticipation that this funding would continue, but they are not able to give me any kind of commitment until the Scottish Government budget's set. I think it would be similar in terms of the Pupil Equity Fund, where we received an allocation for year 1, and it wasn't until towards the end of year 1 that we received an allocation for year 2, but that has continued. So my understanding and belief is that that's the way this will operate, and that I would fully expect at some time in the spring to receive another offer of grant for the following year. I haven't received it yet.
Okay, thanks for
Councillor Murtagh? Sorry, Councillor Cox.
Turns out everyone's speaking. Just on this issue of regionalisation, I fail to see why there is a problem with working together and learning from one another on a regional basis. We do it already in our clusters, in our schools. Whilst I accept the Councillor Nimmo does have fears around centralisation, I think the evidence is that more activity is happening locally, and not just in education, in terms of health, of different organisations working together to actually deliver a better offer. In this case, it's in education, equally across health. So I think if we can learn from one another, I don't see why that's about some sort of centralisation. That's about working together better. So I just want to say that.
Thanks for that. Anyone else? Councillor Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I must say that I can't share the expressed concerns by Councillor Nimmo regarding this, and I think there's an excellent progress is being made in an excellent way and has to be greatly encouraged. And cooperation in education, I'm glad to say, is already showing great progress in areas where in other ways we haven't been very successful in the past in getting cooperation inter-council locally. I wouldn't want to revisit the discussion that we've had about the budget, but I would expect that one of the major areas that we have to face is the question of provision of the syllabus. We've heard about the problems of following up the next year's work plan, and it would look as though we will have great difficulty in being able to provide the subject cover that we would wish to see. And I would hope that in actual fact that part of the problem, the local difficulties that inevitably are going to be there, will be mitigated in some way by the opportunity to get cooperation not only between our local schools but also within our local councils, and perhaps the Director could expand on the possibilities that he sees in that area.
Thanks, Councillor Patrick. Yes, part of the collaboration, as you would expect, involves discussion between myself and my counterparts, all of whom are facing significant budgetary challenges, all of whom are seeking to deliver modern curriculum experiences across the piece. Our colleagues in West Lothian have, over the last 2 to 3 years, been developing some online learning platforms. To date, they have only offered a comparatively small number of subjects virtually, but nevertheless they have that capacity, and we have had discussions with them about some of our pupils being able to access their online courses for some of the more for some of the less popular advanced higher courses where we might have comparatively small numbers. There's scope, we believe, for that to grow, for it to not just be advanced hires but for it to be hires. The other thing that we've all been discussing is ways in which we can reimagine or re-provision what the senior phase currently looks like. So within all 4 council areas, we are working with our various college partners, and we've had some discussions about ways in which we could, for example, begin to grow the number of young people that are accessing foundation apprenticeships. In Falkirk we already have some provision whereby our pupils are going to college to get HNCs. We've had some discussion about HNCs being delivered in schools. So the ideas that have been generated across all 4 councils, and indeed the sharing potentially of online learning platforms, should give us the opportunity, as we move forward in increasingly challenging financial times, to re-provision the way that the curricular offer is both managed and delivered, to make sure that there aren't any losses to the learning and teaching offer across the collaborative area.
Councillor Patrick, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Councillor Murphy, I knew you were going to speak.
He must be psychic.
Just my work to do, you know.
I'd like to echo what Councillor Colley was saying, and Councillor Colley was just, I think, admiring the sticker I have on the front of my notebook today, which is that education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world, which is something I absolutely believe in. And I think that what's important is that education is not just seen as something which is about teachers and children. It's something which we all have a role in understanding in education of ourselves. Probably one of the most valuable things that's come out for me as a parent, learning from the education of my own children, is that development within our schools of the growth mindset attitude, and the understanding that we don't always, although we may think it, have all the answers or the understanding of the way that something works, and that the collaboration and the growth of ideas in adults is as important as it is in children. And probably that's something which I certainly have benefited from as my children have gone through the education system. I also know, and not to be the Councillor Goldie is not the only one from a teaching family background and continuing to be in a teaching family background, I know from a many years experience and the people who still continue to be teachers in my family that one of the things that they still do is pick up the phone to their counterparts in other parts of the country and say, I have this problem, what do you do in your school, in your authority, how can we share that best practice? And I think that in things where that could be a whole system, where we look at case studies, I can think about the music system that was developed out of North Lanarkshire, the Kodai method, which has come into Lardwick Cluster and has been amazing, and something which, you know, is given great benefit to our schools. Lots of other examples where they've come from studies in other local authorities, and that learning's been transferred and we're able to pick that up. But that's a clunky process and not a seamless process. And the benefit of something like the Regional Collaborative is that that can be embedded in the way that we operate. It's not about a centralisation of decision making or taking away something. I looked up what the definition of centralisation is, and part of that is that the action or process of bringing activities together in one place. And that can be fantastic for understanding how that we can then put that back out in our own areas locally. So I think that, yes, as with all new institution arrangements or anything that's coming together, it can take a while for it to find its feet. We're now seeing the benefit of the work that's being done. It's very welcome to hear about the day that's coming up where all authorities can get together and talk about that across platform. And there's obviously lots of different projects which are going on between that, but I think it's very welcome, and it's something which certainly I take forward to be able as a method of understanding and learning as a counsellor what we've got in our education system, that continuing education which we should all be practising all the time.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. I would just like to ask Mr Naylor, I know that teachers are probably aware of the regional boards, they'll know the name, but how aware are they as to what's going on the ground? And again, we're all, you know, how many badges can you wear? I was babysitting for my daughter-in-law last night who's a teacher, and I was speaking to her about it, and she and like that, there seems to be a vague awareness, but where is it as far as teachers are?
It's...
She's not in Falkirk, by the way, before I have to declare.
Well, it's developing and growing. I mean, as you know, we went from a standing start. We formed the collaborative last November, so we've been on the go nearly 15 months. Those that have been most directly involved obviously know all about it. So there are a number of projects that are on the go, where we had, for example, before Christmas, we had 40 early years practitioners from across the 4 councils spent 3 days together looking at improvement methodology and then taking that back into their early years settings. So there's great awareness in that sector, I think, across all 4 councils. Those that are involved in career-long professional learning, certainly at managerial level across the school estate, know about the work of that work stream. The extent to which any individual teacher would know about the work of the collaborative, unless or until the areas that we've decided to focus on impinge on them, then they may well not have any great buy-in to it so far. So our themes were literacy, numeracy, early years and career-long professional learning. So if I were a secondary teacher of French at the moment, it's perfectly conceivable that I haven't heard very much about this other than the highest level briefing from a head teacher. But one of the things that we're hoping is that we now have a process where we've got a regularised newsletter about progress and things that we're doing. And as I mentioned earlier, in fact I didn't mention this, but we now have a Twitter account and we have a website. So what will happen at the launch of this website on the in-service day on the 12th of February is that we will get friends of friends of friends to start tweeting this out and trying to get people to engage and I suppose buy into the process. We've also had a consultation exercise running through the course of November and December. You'll see within the appendix that one of the things that a collaborative needs to do is it needs to make sure, or aspires to, not be a top-down approach. What we're trying to have is a bottom-up approach. So part of the language we're trying to develop is what we call the ask and the offer. So the 4 themes I've just mentioned came about initially through discussion among the 4 directors about areas that we were all already looking at. But one of the exercises that we're engaging in now is for teachers on the ground to say, don't worry about all that, our number 1 issue is X, Y, Z, can we not collaborate on that? So some of the things that are beginning to emerge is an appetite for us, it's been mentioned earlier this morning, can we engage across 4 councils on additional support needs? I think I mentioned at the last committee that our educational psychologists are also getting together, as have our CLD teams have been getting together. So there's green shoots of people that are hearing about the concept of the collaborative, and although it might not be in our plan specifically, they're saying, can we collaborate too within the broad aims and aspirations of what it is we're trying to do to improve outcomes for children.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned top down because it was beginning to sound as though it was exactly that. If, as you say, at that strategic level it's been known, so that was one of my concerns. I mean, obviously I don't have any issues at all. Collaboration and consultation is very much to be welcomed. So it's not the ideals, but it's the mythology of it that I have an issue with. And I think if we are saying that we're trying to support our pupils and give them a better learning experience, which obviously nobody could argue with, I mean, we're stating the obvious here, but I think that if we were looking to do that, then we should be fully funding local authorities and we wouldn't be having the conversations that we've had for the last hour. And you mentioned there just now about educational psychologists. That's one of the cuts that we're looking at in these budget proposals. So it's back to that again. It's like we can give £1 million to this new body to talk about the hardships that we're causing by taking away the money from the actual down on the ground services that we're expected to respond to.
Okay, thanks for that. Anyone else that's not spoken? Mr. Alexander.
I'd like to find out where it says in the papers anywhere that the psychologists are being cut.
It's in one of the budget proposals.
Right.
Well, I didn't want a 1-2, but you can come back on Councillor Alexander's point, but you just continue, Councillor Alexander.
Okay, it's useful to get that alternative viewpoint. It's easy to be an opposition member. Most of my life in the council has been as an opposition member. And it's a lot easier than being in administration. You don't need to bring forward any proposals of your own. And again, we've heard from John this morning talk about funding, but we haven't heard the additional fundings to come from.
Just a second. To be fair, Mr. Alexander, there are times when the opposition will bring forward this additional funding. So, and you've got a point to make about being in opposition, being easier to find. I didn't mind that. But the opposition will bring forward its proposals at the right time. The report here has been asked to be noted. But so we continue.
Welcome that, convener. But what I was doing was responding to comments that were made by another member, and that's what this round table or round about the table is about. Is responding as well as proposing. And I do have concerns that we've yet to see any alternatives come forward. You've given a commitment, and we welcome that commitment.
Do you support the commitment?
I support the commitment for an alternative budget, yes.
No, do you support the commitment I've made?
For an alternative budget, yeah.
No. You said you've heard the commitment, or is that the commitment to the alternative budget?
Yeah, you've given a commitment to
I thought you meant the commitment with no job losses in the school estate.
Well, like I say, budgets...
But anyway,
budgets
so see, I knew this was going to happen. I'm trying, Mr Alexander, I'll give you all the time you need, and we're going to be perfectly fair with you. But just at the last minute, we're going to drift into the he says, she says, and let's have the debate that's going to take place in maybe 3 weeks. So just make your point and just stick to the point.
Respectfully suggest, though, that you're the one that introduced that.
And did you swap?
But with regards to he says, she says...
Well, let's go.
What the fact remains is that in this report, what we're seeing is progress. And that's something that's to be welcomed. I cannot, like my colleague, cannot understand why anyone could object to collaboration between and cooperation between both authorities. We don't always get it right in Falkirk, and it's useful to learn other people's experiences. We don't always get it wrong either, and it's useful to pass on to other education authorities the good points about Falkirk. So I'm pleased that we're recording that, and I'm pleased that we're seeing genuine progress. So I appreciate the fact that any change obviously brings a challenge. Any change brings the opportunity to become defensive, and I'm glad to see that that's being addressed as per the report.
Thanks for that. I'm not going to have all the debate, but if you found the reference you want,
Educational Psychology Service saving proposed 0.852 one full-time equivalent.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Perhaps before we move on, just for clarification, perhaps the Director might want to clarify that.
No, the Director's not going to clarify it, just wind up.
I'm allowed to ask questions.
Yeah, but I'm saying to you, you can't ask that question. Not when you're winding up.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Not when you're winding up.
That's fine, Convener. I'll wind up, and I'll clearly say that there is no proposed cuts coming from us with regard to psychological services. However, what I can say is very grateful thanks to John Patrick for his contribution and his views, because he obviously sees that there's opportunities in this collaboration, particularly when the whole of the public sector is very tight financially, and we do know within psychological services that indeed that there's pressures in being able to get psychologists, and by working across the collaborative, that could enable us to provide a much better service across the councils as a whole, and look at other ways that we can support our children with particular needs. I think that we are in danger of losing what is a very good news story here with some of the rhetoric that has come from round the table. Collaboration is positive, it is good, sharing experiences is very, very beneficial. It also provides peer support and it allows people to grow and become empowered. In doing that with our staff, that allows our children to become empowered and to grow and develop and to be into the best that they can be. And that is what we are all about, certainly in Falkirk, and I know that my colleagues in other authorities think very similarly. And if this is a way to be able to enhance that and be able to get the outcomes that we want for our children, then we have to grasp this and actually take the opportunities that are presented to it. I wish the collaborative all the very best. I look forward to it developing further. And indeed, as the information comes out to staff and shared with the parents about what the achievements of the collaborative are, I think we'll certainly start to see the benefits across the board.
Thanks for that. The executives asked to know. Is that agreed? Okay, thanks for that. Next item is Early Learning Taylor. Mr. Greenhorn. Mr. Greenhorn, General Mayor's Mr. Greenhorn.
Thanks very much, Gina. 5 areas are areas outlined in section 1.1 for the main reasons this report's coming to the Education Executive today. Two main parts of that are really to feedback on the consultation exercise that was undertaken to look at the 3 properties that we're asked to look at and discussed at the last meeting that arised from the strategic property review, and to give the Education Executive an update on our plans to accelerate our Year 2 plans, and also to rephase, as we discussed the last time, some of the projects we planned for Year 2 based on the lessons learned from Year 1. Also, there's an update on some of the major projects we're working on currently in the paper today. The 5 recommendations outlined in section 2 before the Education Exec today, and just in relation to Councillor Nimmo's point of view, I was just pointing out that in 211 and 212 there is an agreement in both of those points as well, and I apologise if the agreement was hidden in the narrative there, and we'll probably take lessons to correct that in future reports, so it's quite clear that there's a bit for noting and there's a bit for agreement on it as well. Section 3 just summarises some of the background and some of the work that's preoccupied the team since the last meeting. A lot of the work has saw its fruition come to what's contained in the report today. Section 4 looks at the considerations before the exec today, and the first 3 areas are looking at the 3 properties that we're asked to look at vis-à-vis the findings of the strategic property review. Section 4.1 looks at the consideration of the Stenhouse Moor Social Work Office for early years expansion use. Following a meeting that we held to discuss with parents what their views are, the majority of the respondees and the parents who attended the meeting were against the use of the Stenhouse Moor Social Work. The reasons for that are given in section 4.1.1. Those present at the meeting also suggested that a preferred site, if it was going to be an amalgamation, they accepted amalgamation, and the preferred site, if it was going to be an amalgamation, was the Inchlear site in the same area. In addition to the meeting we had, we also had email responses, and we set up a separate email address to take written responses from those people who couldn't attend and wanted to submit written responses. Against this option, there was 10 written responses. 8 of them were against the use of the social work office. 2 made general comments, and another 8 who were against it. The 8 who were against it, 2 suggested amalgamation on site at Inchlear as part of the comments that we made. Reflecting on that, the proposal before the executive today is that officers within the early years planning team consider plans to amalgamate the existing provision that we do have on site at Inchlear. That would mean that both Lambert Day Nursery and also the Stenhouse Moor Social Work Office would hitherto become surplus to requirements, and subject to that they would be asked, members would be consulted on that before any disposal or other use was considered. The second consideration that we were agreed to look at was consideration of the Kinglass Social Work Office in Bowness. Again, a meeting was held at Bowness Academy, and the summary of the findings for that meeting are contained in the section there. What we say is the majority of the parents that were at that meeting welcomed it, because in the Bowness area we don't have at the moment an all year round provision that suits the 1140 hours going forward. They welcomed the accepted use of the Kinglass Social Work Office as a viable site for consideration, and there was a number of considerations, mainly because the Kinglass Social Work Office is a dual site. It's used by a medical GP practice and also our social work offices on site as well. So a number of items that they wish to consider, I was looking at as we develop the plans for it, and they're outlined in it. It's mainly around the parking, separate entrance issue, but these are things that we would ordinarily consider in anything that we're doing in terms of design for early years campuses and early years expansion programme. On that option, there was no written responses to the option. Therefore, the proposal that's been brought forward to the Education Exec is that we propose the plans to use the Kinglass Social Work Office for our early years expansion plans within the Bowness area. The third consideration was around the former private nursery up at the Calendar Business Park. Again, a meeting was held in Victoria Primary School, and the views of that meeting are summed up in the report. Broadly speaking, the attendees certainly all welcomed the use of the private nursery. For those of you who don't know it, the opportunity to avail itself for the outdoor area, given it's next to the Calendar Park, for outdoor learning and play experiences are substantial, and we see that not just being a benefit to a local provision, but a benefit for the wider Falkirk area as well, if we can develop that on site. With a strong preference to retain an existing provision on the Woodburn site, and there was an acceptance that we could re-provision both the Queen Street and the Woodburn and the Victoria capacity moving forward to 1140 over the 3 sites. One would be Woodburn, the other one would be the Victoria Primary School site, and the third one would be taking on board the Calendar Business Park nursery provision itself. In this option, again, there was no written responses to it that we received. Therefore, the proposal before the exec today is that we progress the plans to develop the provision across the 3 sites, Calendar Business Park, Woodburn and Victoria Primary School. Hitherto, that would mean that the Queen Street nursery site would become surplus to operational requirements, and we would, subject to local member consultation as well, would be disposed or considered for other use as we go through this process.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry, I apologise, Gary. Did you pause for breath?
I'll take a pause for a breath. That was it. In terms of the other main thing we're looking at, and we spoke about it at the last meeting, we're looking at how we could accelerate our plans and how we could rephase the Year 2 plans, learning from the lessons that we've learned in Year 1. I'm pleased to say that in section 421 we are planning to accelerate 5 projects, and they're listed there. Once those 5 projects would bring another 208 1140 places into our early years estate, and the proposal that's approved would mean that it would increase the total capacity that we have to 714 from Easter of this year. A further 8 projects that we plan to do in Year 2 are shown in a phased manner. Those bring another 508 places to the 1140, and those are contained in Appendix 1, and they're phased from August of 19 onwards. The section 4.3 summarises some of the major projects that the team are currently working on just now. Very exciting project is the Hall Glen Early Years Centre that's being worked on just now. We're probably a month away from concluding the design work for that. For those of you that don't know the site itself gives us a fantastic opportunity, given the geographic location, the natural contours of the site itself, and also the nature and the woodland area that's on site. It's a substantial site, and it makes absolute good choice to locate the provision for our all year, all day nursery provision on the Hall Glen site. The costing of it is expected, well, we've not finalised the design, it's around at the 1.9 to 2.2 million, and that's contained within the capital resources that we have. The current capacity we're looking at is 20 eligible 2-year-olds and around 72 3 to 5-year-olds, so a substantial site, and it certainly would be the focus of our augmentation of our 1140 all year, all day provision within that ward. The second thing that we were looking at is that we were looking at in terms of David Mackay's area, looking at how we could use some of the space from Oxstein School as we look to develop alternative approaches to the ASN provision there. There is no space in Oxstein School. That space has allowed us to work towards increasing the capacity for Murray Primary School itself by moving the current nursery class into the space there. It suits because that Oxstein School also has its own outdoor area and a separate entrance. The increased capacity would also help support the capacity challenges that we had within the Grangemouth area. In turn, previously we were looking at different arrangements for Bean Cross Primary School, and talking to the head teachers at both Murray Primary School and Bean Cross Primary School, we've listened to them, and both the head teachers are on board with our current assessment of our plans for that particular area. So the plans for that area would be that we would utilise the space that remains within the Oxstein School to create extra capacity. And that has a knock-on effect for Bean Cross School, which suits the head teacher and the parents that we've been talking to there as well. The third bit is the work that's going on at Kinnaird in terms of the early years campus up in Ward 4. And again, by August of 19, the current campus will be available on site. It will be increasing the current capacity on site from 70, 73, 100. A fairly substantial early years establishment. In addition to that, there will be 4 classrooms provided within that new build from August of 19. What will then happen is that we will do a bit of work in the internal side of the current Kinnaird primary school to reconfigure the space that would be vacated from the current nursery site and transform that to an area that would be future use for the primary one pupils. What that will mean is in August 20, the early years campus will wholly be utilised for the delivery of 140 hours for 200 pupils. So it's a substantial building, and it'll serve a substantial number of pupils. As everyone knows, that's we spoke about it earlier on, the demographic growth in that particular area has led to that size of provision that's needed. And that will be on a full day, full year provision. Section 4.4 just outlines the ongoing work that we do with a number of other of the government organisations, Scottish Future Trust and Improvement Service. Regular reports and regular feedback and regular meetings are held by them so that we can get a quality check and a sense check on what we're doing to make sure what we're doing is in tandem and is in line with what's going on nationally. I think that's very important that we maintain that working relationship. Section 4.5, very topical recently, is the funding that we provide for early years partners and the childcare providers. The government have intimated that if we wanted to use resources to provide and support private nurseries going forward, we can do that. But the decision is down to each local council. On that, we're talking to both our finance colleagues and our legal colleagues about that. A recent government letter that was received when we got some additional funding outlined a number of things, and I'll not go through it, but it's outlined in that section of the paper. But broadly, it's looking to say that we can use some of the revenue funding to support the expansion plans early on for our colleagues in the private sector. What we say is that given this, and given the ongoing dialogue we're having with finance and legal, that it's our intention tomorrow, once we get approval at Education Exec today, to convene a meeting with our private colleagues to discuss their input to that and see in what way we could help and support them at an early stage of the early years expansion plans. The plan would be that we try to convene a meeting with the private sector next week or the following week to see what we could do. After that, the plan that I would have is to bring a report back to the Education Exec in March to outline the discussions that we've had and to put forward a number of proposals or recommendations to the Education Exec. I think it's right that we do that. And that would be done in time either for any changes we wanted to make in April or in August of 2019. In terms of workforce planning, section 4.6 outlines some of the key areas that we're working with. The government are planning to hold a meeting in every local authority area to support workforce planning to encourage more entrance to the sector. And I believe that meeting has now been arranged after we wrote the report for Graham High School later next month, which is again is positive. Very positive. We've had quite a good response from the staff studies that Karen and her team have held with staff around the accelerated projects and new projects to look at where staff suit them within the contracts they've got. We can support staff, move them in a way that suits staff and what they wanted to do. The 30 new projects outlined in Appendix 1, we estimate just now are going to provide circa 80 new posts coming into the establishment, and again it's an economic boost to the Falkirk area. I think we should all take credit for helping support us get that through. Section 4.7 looks at the ongoing support that we provide with childminders and the ongoing approach we take with the Scottish Childminding Association. Section 6, just to get, I said last month, we give a quick update on the resourcing implication. The capital funding, we've got £16 million of capital funding. We always knew that because of the design work that's needed, next financial year 1920 will be the year that we spend significant amounts of that. So far, about 1.7 million of the capital has been funded, but as we go through 1920, quite a significant lot will be spent because we're doing a lot of the bricks and mortar new build extension projects during that year. Again, I'll keep people up to date with that. All of the work is done with the government and the Care Inspectorate's Space to Go guidance, and it's also done in conjunction with the financial matrices we've got from the Scottish Futures Trust. Overall, Everything we've spoken about today is contained within the capital resource plan and resources that we currently have. Revenue funding, I mentioned briefly a word at the last meeting that we had an extra just under £179,000 from the £6 million of our allocated funds. That's summarised in the section 6.2. Again, for the current year projections, our current year budget is just under £2 million, and the France colleagues have intimated that the spend this year will just be on the button with that. So in terms of revenue funding, we've got the money, we've used it, and it's going to be spent. We're not going to be overspent or underspent. It'll be almost on the button. One of the things that's important is that because we are looking at a number of funding assumptions around the financial package, this is looking at the assumptions that were made when we put in the initial template to the government over a year ago now, and that's looking at the living wage requirements and the estimates to use for living wage, and also the impact on school meals going forward. So we'll wait that bit of report. That report may bring with it additional financial resources, we don't know yet, but once it comes, I'll certainly feed it back to the Education Executive. Happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mr Greenhorn. Councillor Nicholson.
I will try and be slightly briefer than Mr Greenhorn.
No comment. Because you and I might agree.
No, all joking aside, I thank Gary for that report and indeed his team. They are delivering a massive change programme, and they are doing it in a very professional way and at pace, and it's something that the service should be very proud of as we move to rolling out the 1140 hours. So I'll just ask the Director and Gary to take all back to the team involved in delivering the early years expansion programme. A couple of points that I will highlight, but I won't labour any great length, but it's the consultation process around the particular areas around Inchclare and Larbert Social Work Office and the Larbert Day Nursery, and again Woodburn and the private nursery at Calendar Park, and looking at the best use of the facilities at Queen Street and Victoria there. I think the consultation process has gone very well. Well, there wasn't a massive amount of interest. I think we each had the right people there, and those that were of greatest interest, and the views were very articulately put forward and indeed reflected in the report, and I think that's a very positive thing for parents to see, that well, the proposals were there to see, their case was put forward and their preferences have been noted, and that has been taken on board, and I think that's very positive to see. The early years projects moving forward, Hall Glen in particular, I think that will be a great boost to that particular area, and will certainly bring some added value to the school and the community there, and it's pleased to see that that's going forward and that we've been able to look to accelerate projects. I think that reflects on the professionalism of the team that's taken it forward, that we're able to accelerate things and be able to deliver, because as we've started to roll out the 1140 hours, I'm very aware that now everybody's now looking to be able to tap into that, and the demand is there and the enthusiasm is there, and we're doing our best to respond to that. Well, we can't do everywhere all at the same time. In relation to the other associated work streams, I think your point's well made around the 18 new posts. As many parts of the public sector is seeking to shrink, this is an area that is growing. It's also helping to professionalise the role of early years officers, and indeed the importance of getting that first contact at an early stage with our young our children, and in order to be able to get them on the right trajectory. Funding, well, obviously with capital and revenue funding, we've had additionality from Scottish Government around this, which is enabling us to actually deliver this, and I think we're starting to see some of the fruits of that at an early stage. Well, we've not got a great measure of that, but I think that the whole concept is very positive and will indeed be of great benefit as they move through the education system. We should start to see the differences. Therefore, I'm happy to move the recommendations. I assume that you are looking for some steer from members with regard to St Muir Social Work Office and Albert Day Nursery, and that subject to consultation you would be looking to declare that surplus to requirements. Is that something you would want to do from this, or would you bring that back as a further report?
Subject to Mr Moody's agreement, certainly the wish is here to say that at this moment in time the normal process would be we would declare these potentially surplus to operational requirements. After that, it goes through a process of consultation with local members. Yes.
Since Gary was so timorous with his report, I think we'll agree that that can be done, and we can agree subject to consultation.
Absolutely subject to consultation with the local members, and it just allows the service to move on with flexibility. On that, I'm happy to move the recommendations, Convener.
Second that.
Second, and is there a right to come back?
Okay. There's a light on the road. Which one of you is?
It's me, Convener.
Councillor Blizzard.
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to speak a wee bit about Kinglass Social Work Office in Bowness. And also, I have a letter here from a private nursery in Bowness. I would like to circulate to the committee if that's okay, so members could have a wee read at it. And well, I'm talking about the social work office in Bowness. And
well, if you want to circulate it, we can do that.
And perhaps at the end of it, Mr Greenhorn would like to comment on it.
Yeah. Sorry, but we can keep talking. If we require time to read, I don't know what it is, but if we require time for recess to do that, we'll do that. When you can read it.
So regarding the Kinglass Social Work Office, although the report states that we'll look at parking and drop-off, given that the site is shared with a GP practice and already used to drop off and pick up students from Bowness Academy, which is across the road, is there suitable parking available? Cars will be regularly in use on-site and a potential risk for accident. Children's education should be a pleasurable experience, given that for some time there has been talk of an extension to Kinneil Primary School to accommodate more early years provision. Wouldn't this be a better option, thereby causing less distress in the future when the children move from early years to primary class? Some parents have children of varying ages at different education settings. For those who have access to a car, it will prove to be difficult for dropping off, picking up at various times. For those families without access to a car, it will prove to be an additional burden to travel between the sites and extremely unpleasant and poor weather. So, given these concerns, I would like to move an amendment. And the amendment reads, Education Executive asks the Director of Children's Services to revisit the proposed early years provision at Kinglass Social Work Medical Practice instead of Kinneil Primary School, and report back to the Education Executive's next meeting on the grounds of health and safety and security within the grounds of the property.
Have you got a copy of your amendment there?
Yes.
We'll give it to the clerk.
Can we get that? Is that you, Councillor Blizzard?
Thank you.
Councillor Nimmer?
I'm happy to second the amendment. Can I just point out there's a slight typo? We're taking out the word council. That's just been omitted. It's just an error.
So instead of council, we should say members.
Education Executive.
Okay.
Convener, could I ask if that was a letter that was read by Councillor Bissett, because that's not the same letter that's been circulated?
That was a separate item. That was on the private nursery in Bowness.
Yeah, so, sorry, I got confused there as well. So, if we discuss first of all the kids' letter, what was it you wanted done with that?
The first one was Kinglass Social Work Office, and my amendment is that we revisit that and perhaps allocate the early learning and childcare in the primary school.
Right. And did you send it?
I'll send you that.
Are you any clearer or not?
I'm sorry about that.
No, we're seeking clarity on this letter is to be brought forward, Councillor Mr. Moody.
Yes, Convener, I think Councillor Bissett has raised two separate and discrete matters. The first of those is an amendment which, as I understand it, would allow the recommendations to proceed other than the recommendation in relation to the Kinglass Centre. And the thrust of the amendment is to ask the Director to go away and think again on the proposal for the Kinglass Centre and consider whether the primary school site is a better site than the proposal contained within the report. I haven't had a chance to consider all the details in the letter, but I think it may relate to the section of the report in relation to capital funding, and it may be better to hear separately from Mr Greenhorn in relation to that matter.
Okay, so does anyone want to talk to the amendment first?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How would this sit, having gone out to consultation?
If I could offer a comment that Councillor Bissett's right, that we had a number of options. The government's funding guidelines are very clear. Use what you have. It's the first one. So what they're saying to that is that if the council has space in any of its current facilities, they should be looking to use it and utilise it before we build bricks and mortar extensions elsewhere. Which is why, as part of the strategic property review, it identified that through the move towards the agreed hub locations, there would be space provided in the Kinglass Centre itself as social workers vacate that area. So it's right for us to do that, because by doing that we'd be using an asset that the council own, and we wouldn't then be having to spend money on bricks and mortar extending, which is absolutely at the heart of what the government's funding is all about. So that is the primary thrust for us to look at that, and it's absolutely quite right, because that's at the heart of what the government intend and ask us to do. In terms of the letter that's circulated, if I could offer comment, that was what I referred to in the report itself. We are aware of a number of challenges that some of the early years partners have in terms of funding as we expand their early years capacity. Will it take away some of the current clients that they have? And also the government have been quite clear in a recent letter that we could look to use some of the revenue funding to help and support our private providers in a way that we probably hadn't thought of before, going forward, to help support them to be ready for the 2020 deadline. And that's why I said to the executive, our plans around that are to meet with all our partner providers, including the organisation whose letter you've circulated, within the next 2 weeks, to look at what the challenges are, to see how we can support them, to see then if we've got the financial resources to do that. Now, the government have given us extra money, and they've intimated that extra money could be used for that. We didn't have the time to engage prior to getting the letter and prior to come back. So my intention would be to do just that, engage with the private sector and come back to the March committee here with the result of that consultation, discussion, and with some proposals and recommendations.
Fine, thanks for that, Mr Greenhorn. So basically what we're hearing is that the amendment is just to go back for consultation with the private sector. Mr Greenhorn said we're going to do that. That can be done. On the amendment. Well, let me just deal with the first issue then, being with two separate. In terms of the amendment, the Director of Children's Services to revisit the proposed early years provision at Kinglass social work medical practice instead of Kinneil Primary School, and report back to Education Executives next meeting on the grounds of health and safety and security within the housing property. We've had bits and pieces of problems with consultation in the very recent past, so I would be hopeful that the administration will agree to that, but we'll wait and see. So that's the situation there. Just leave it there. Just leave it there.
Sorry, Convener, I'm just a bit concerned that, having consulted with parents, we're going to have to go back to consult with them.
We've just done that though, last month, on another subject.
Sorry, I'm not aware of.
You're not aware of recent consultation, we put our letter and then we went back and consulted again.
In relation to?
In relation to education. what I'm saying is the principle is there. I didn't really think it's
I've not
I don't think it's a big deal, you know. But on you go,
I've not got any particular issue. I just think that having consulted with parents and taken their views into account, to go back to them, we could be making a mockery of the consultation process in doing that, but unless there is good reason to do that. And I just need to be clear that we're not going to disadvantage some of the decision-making process we've already gone through by moving the goalposts.
Okay, Councillor Colley.
It's actually just a question for Gary. You talked about the use what you have and the government approach to that. I don't know Kinneil Primary, so apologies, but if that was talking about an extension and we actually had something else that we could use, would that create a problem in terms of air capital funding but also the revenue funding? So it's just a general question because I'm really not sure.
Our intention to, if it's agreed at the executive, to progress plans to look at how we could configure Kinglass Social Work Office. We would then obviously have to look at that, but we're just getting permission to do it now. Our intention would be to come back to the executive at the next meeting, and part of that report would contain exactly some of the challenging issues that Councillor Bissett's raised, because we've already picked up and talking to parents at the consultation. And it would be wrong for us to come back and say we can do something if there's challenges on site. So the challenge that we have is to come back and look at what Councillor Bissett has raised as some concerns, and we'll focus on those, on trying to alleviate those concerns in any design plan that we have around the Kinglass Centre. So it would be intention anyway to come back to the executive report in March, and part of that report would be to alleviate some of the concerns that parents have already raised with during the consultation, which broadly align with the point that Councillor Bissett has raised here. So this is the agreement is for us to progress, but not necessarily for us to do it, because obviously if there are financial constraints and other constraints, we would have to report that back in March. But either way, we will come back in March with the findings from that for Education Executive to make a decision on it.
Thanks for that, Mr. Naylor.
I think Gary's just covered what I'd said. I mean, it says in the report specifically a viable option subject to considering parking and drop-off, separate entrance and internal division. And as Gary's just said, it would be our intention to scope that and then report back in March to say, yes, this can be done, or no, it's technically not possible, or we're not satisfied with the safety arrangements, so will need to be considered. So that work would be done. And as Gary's just said, this is asking today, can we progress this? Can we go away and do that work and then report back?
So Councillor Bissett first, just trying to get clarification really. So that you think that meets the requirements that you're asking for?
I think it does convener, so as long as the report comes back and covers the health and safety aspects that I've mentioned, I'd be quite happy with that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks, gentlemen. Councillor Nicholl, were you talking about any colleague?
I was trying to attract
I wasn't aware if you were finished.
No, I'm finished.
It's just at the end of the meeting, right, okay now.
The powers of scientific awareness may be
I'm just not as hot as they used to be, actually.
I'm just obviously seeking clarity. I don't know whether Councillor Bissett is in withdrawing, because I think my concern is that it is already contained in the top of page 86 on the second arrow point. Right. Okay. So that I mean, I think that's the clarification that it's already contained within. So if that's if I'm not going to continue by making those points.
Right. Thanks. Anyone? The Reverend Rowe.
You've just clarified it. My question was: is there a need to go with the amendment if the spirit of it is contained already in the proposal? So
can we agree the report? Agreed. Fine. Thanks for that.
Convener, so can I just, because I reserve the right to come back on the general report, because I think it's important to state that, particularly from the constitution point of view, that as Councillor Nicholl was saying, the wishes, particularly with regard to Inchlayers, obviously have great understanding of, have been respected within that report, and that's to be welcomed. I'd add my thoughts to that. And since we are going to agree the report, I would just like to add on a slightly less, serious note, perhaps a more serious note, that one of the concerns was about the outdoor space and outdoor play in the Stenhouse-Muir area, and at 7:30 tonight, the outdoor playing space in the Stenhouse-Muir area occupied by Aberdeen Football Club coming down. We hope very much that Stenhouse Muir will have some excellent success in that area, so I'd like to wish them well in that endeavour and hope they can still
Tenuous link.
Okay, the comments will read the report. Next report is short break service statement.
Thank you, Convener. The Carers Scotland Act 2016 was enacted on the 1st of April 2018 and introduces a number of duties on local authorities and the NHS, some of which are delegated to integration joint boards. One of the new duties is to consider whether carer support should take the form of a short break and to publish a short break services statement for each local authority. This report seeks approval of the statement developed for Falkirk, which is appended to this report. The statement applies to both adult and children's services. As such, it requires approval from both the local authority and the integration joint board. The statement describes the range of ways in which carers can access short breaks, including through funded support from the local authority and by accessing community-based support. I think it's important to note, as stated in section 5 of the report, that both adult and young carers were actively involved to produce the statement. Section 6 of the report outlines financial implications, referencing new funding, Falkirk's share of this and how it will be used. Para 6.3 reports that a further 5 years of additional funding will be made available in line with the financial memorandum associated with the Carers Scotland Act 2016. The financial memorandum assumes about 60% of young carers will seek a young carer statement. To conclude, the Council would be at risk if it is unable to meet the statutory duties laid down in the Act. The level of demand for carers' assessments will only become clear over time, given the number of carers in the community is unknown. Ongoing monitoring is critically important, and we will commit that this will take place. The Integration Joint Boards have already approved the statement, and it will be published by the due date, with a note that this is subject to the approval of this committee. The document will be continually reviewed and updated. I refer the Executive to the recommendations outlined in section 2. I'm joined by Vivian Thompson, Service Manager, who's been involved in the process relating to the implementation of the Carers Scotland Act, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Councillor Cole.
Yes, obviously this is already going through the Integrated Joint Board, and I very much welcome it. The details of what children's services can provide, not only to children and young people, young carers, but also parents of disabled children. To me, it's the start of a process. The short break statement, it details what we have, but not what we want to change and what we want to develop. And the discussions about developing that as we go along in partnership with young carers and adult carers. I wanted to note a couple of things that are coming alongside that. I mean, I think there's some really exciting and innovative work going on in terms of short breaks. Respitality specifically mentioned in there. That's a fairly new initiative, and Falkirk Carers Centre has grabbed the opportunity to be able to develop that further and look at how that may possibly meet the needs of young carers as well. Alongside the short breaks for young carers, there's a range of work around young carer statements and how do we increase uptake and enable young carers to access a break if they need it. There's an additional £10.5 million of funding going in across Scotland, making £29.5 million in this financial year, and obviously Falkirk will have its share. Alongside that, in autumn this year, there will be a Young Carers Grant introduced, and for carers who are aged between 16 and 18, a grant of up to, well, this is under consultation at the moment, of around £300, and young carers may choose to use that for some form of short break. There's also development of a Young Scot card and a specific package for young carers who are 11 to 25 on discounts, information and a range of options, and money off travel, and in 2020 concessionary travel for those who are young carers. So I think short breaks are part of a package for young people about supporting young carers. It can be very difficult for them. We want to make sure that they have the right educational opportunities, but also they have the right opportunities to be able to have breaks and to be able to interact with their peers as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Second, Councillor Meekin.
Yeah, I'm happy to second. I think young carers can be very hidden and very difficult to identify, and a lot of what they do is through choice. Choice because they do have this familial love for the person which they're caring for, but that does limit their opportunities. And what we want to be able to do is to be able to support them in their caring role and open up their opportunities so that they have the opportunity to have the life chances that everyone else has, and aren't then impacted adversely by their caring role. But we have to recognise they do this out of the love and the care for the person that they look after, and it's their choice to do that, which I think any of us would take up as in a family environment. But in order to support them, we need to make sure there's opportunities for them to have that respite, make sure that their mental health is looked after, and also that they have the same educational opportunities as well as the social opportunities. And I think this is a good way to be able to do this. It offers a very diverse range of what a short break could be, and that means that it can be bespoke to individual circumstances. So I'm happy to support this.
Thanks a lot. Anyone else? If not, can we agree the report? Thanks to Lacey. And thanks to Aaron and Alice who sat through that today. I'm sure you were aspiring to be here the rest of your life. But I wouldn't recommend it as a career. So thanks to everyone for coming along.
Sorry, can I just ask one thing just before we close
Certainly.
up? Just obviously, I know earlier I spoke as a secondary representative. I'm just conscious of the fact that we don't have a primary representative at the moment. My understanding was that there was interest sought from interested parties in September, but there's nothing moved forward with it. I just wondered where we were at with it, that was all. Because obviously it's important that there is that kind of wider perspective.
Very important. And it sometimes puts a heavier onerous on yourself speaking to half the teaching. Yeah.
Thanks, what I'll do is I'll pick that up after this meeting and make sure we actually progress that, and just make sure we understand what's going on with the process, and I'll use with it.
If it's at all possible, can we have a primary representative here before the next meeting?
I will do my utmost.
Right,
Can I add on a similar note, the secondary parent rep hasn't been at the meeting since I joined the committee, so I raised this with council officer a couple of months ago. Just obviously I'm here as a parent rep for primary school, but it would be good to have a parent rep for secondary school as well.
I'll certainly take that with Colin Moody and make sure we progress that as well.
Okay, this is what happens when you're lenient in the chair. But well done. Thanks for making the points anyway. Okay.